Welcome to another episode of Battlefield Dev Talks. I'm David Sörlund, multiplayer producer for Battlefield 5, and I have Valerian and Ludwig with me today. We're going to talk about maps.
Yes.
How do we build maps at DICE?
We basically start with an experience. It might be a gameplay experience, or to be honest, most of the time it's a gameplay experience. But it could be a different thing. It could be you've seen something that gives you a certain feeling in a history book, or it could be anything. But it basically starts with that experience and trying to convey that through gameplay by trying to create a specific type of gameplay. And that's kind of the initial point. And then marrying that together with a biome and a setting and all these kind of things. But I think that's something that you do more of an earlier stage, right?
Yeah, what we have usually is, for this title specifically, we had the untold, unknown, unplayed stuff. So that's something that we wanted to touch on. So we started with that, and specifics, I think we have something we can show you from Rotterdam. How it starts is just a super early SketchUp. In this one happens to be quite similar to what we ended up with.
Yeah.
And what it is, it's just a top down of an interesting location, which is sprinkled with reference photos. And as an interesting fact, these were way more simpler to find for this title compared to BF1, which was under World War I. So we had very little to go to. So these key locations, they need to work from a gameplay perspective. So that's important. We know what we want to have, so the map will remind of something, but it's very important that the gameplay works. So from here, this will end up in an editor as a placeholder or a couple of placeholders or objects for these things that you see here. And then we start playtesting it. And the first one will probably be on just a plane where everybody will get shot as soon as they leave the little cover that exists.
Yeah.
The purple cover that
purple cover that exists. And from there on, we add elevation, we add more details, we add cover, and we just keep iterating. So it's an iteration process that goes for years, technically. It could go for years, from day one. Yeah.
You can have a playtest in the morning, and then the next day you have something that's changed. Like we've had those several times where it's just...
And that is the time when we do these sort of like super heavy changes where we can take a part of a map and just add it to another map and just reshuffle something completely.
Yeah.
I know you have experience of that.
Yeah, we do crazy stuff. And like this process is just a constant process of iteration, reading feedback, talking to people and changing and like all of these things. And it's this thing whereas when you start it and when you end it, you don't realize that you spent how long you've actually spent and what kind of a journey you've actually made. So looking back at old screenshots and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can see here comparison.
It's weird. It's like looking at pictures of when you were, a teenager or something, and it's like, what, that used to be this map and all that sort of stuff.
Now, I mean, we get questions, or I get questions a lot online about, this specific map, couldn't you have more cover here? Wouldn't that be better? And normally I say, no, we try that because we actually did in like 14 incarnations.
Yeah.
And then, no, it was better without the cover in that specific point, most likely. Yeah. Obviously, there could be things that we've missed, but in general, the gameplay-wise, we've touched a lot of areas. And speaking of maps, we have maps in this game, right? Battlefield 5. What are our launch maps and the package?
Yes. The package for launch is 4 biomes, 8 maps. So there's map pairs from each biome. Those are different, usually both in terms of visual, what they look like, and in terms of gameplay. They complement each other. They can be separated by a couple of hours, like in the case of Rotterdam, a couple of hours and a couple of 100 meters. So Rotterdam happens right before the war, the invasion of Rotterdam, and then the devastation afterwards, which is the second map. Or it could be hundreds of kilometers apart, like in the Northern Africa biome. But what we try to do, if we look at the spider web here, this is an intent that we have. We try to cover, we want to be as wide as possible. We want the launch package to contain something for everyone. And we want to make sure that some map excels in one area, if not more. So we will always have a large map. We will always have an urban map. We always have some focus on infantry, another focus on vehicles, and so on and so on.
Yeah, like we want to really hit all the edges in this schematic. And I guess you could say like even though the maps are paired up in pairs, it's more like an apple and a pear.
Exactly, yeah.
Like they're not the same kind of thing. Like even though they belong together, like if you're looking at these and you kind of see that both of them belong in the same biome and the screenshot kind of had the same color scheme, they are completely different. Like there's not a lot of things that makes Aerodrome and Hamada Like they're both technically in the same biome, but they are completely different. Yeah.
And speaking of that, in ground operations, which is why we build them in pairs, right? We want to build upon that. Let's talk about ground operations, and let's talk about Norway, because you've seen Norway in the open beta and even in the alphas. You see part of it, half of it, the Narvik map. And the other half of it is the Fjell 652.
Yeah.
That map is, as you can see here, is kind of crazy. It's infantry with airplanes.
Yep.
Yeah, and that I'm surprised that worked out so well. Like it's that map has one of the strongest initial impressions that any of the maps that ships in Battlefield 5 has. Like when you start running around and it's heavy snow and you're on top of this like fjell, and you see a plane going past you like 10 meters away. It's just
because all of a sudden you're very close to the planes. You're almost in the same space.
Yeah,
as they
you're
are.
at the same height all this time because they're like circling around this elevated area. So it's so weird to have this super intense infantry grind on the top of a mountain, surrounded by something that usually doesn't exist in the same plane or level height.
Exactly.
You mean?
Yeah. No, I mean that's a common comment we get from players from previous titles. I mean, planes, or the plane of the airplanes, is separated from the ground forces, and in this map they're very much like aligned now, right?
Yeah, that deserves a mention because it's an interesting experience that we haven't really done before. And in the small game modes that are usually domination, team deathmatch, and stuff like that, the maps that map particularly strangely reminds me of Forest from BF1, I believe. Mm-hmm. It has that sort of, I wouldn't call them corridors, but it's almost like mazy because of the top of the mountain. It's small areas. There's like one large area where the little cottage village is located. But other than that, it's a sort of super dense infantry map. And then on top of that, on the larger maps, all of a sudden you have planes that you can interact with. And you have lots of AA batteries you can fire up to the planes and stuff like that.
I think the Forest comparison is really good because it has this kind of flowy feel where some other maps have more straighter paths, but this one is kind of always kind of creasing up and down. And you have this crest.
Right, there's always a corner to pass.
Yeah, exactly.
But speaking of that, ground operations, how does these two maps play? Like, I guess they're covering all of it, like you can see here, but the game mode-wise, what are we doing?
Yes, what we do, ground operations was introduced in BF1, so what we changed from that was that we have right now we have 3 days that can extend into the fourth day. But we launch with 3 days of operations that cover these two maps we talked about from the same biome. So it's the narrative story that is larger than just one game mode, one map. So we decided to keep that, but we are able to rotate the game modes inside these ground operations. So rather than before, when we only had Breakthrough in operations, now we lifted Breakthrough as a standalone. We are using Breakthrough where it fits, where we have a narrative about the team pushing through the map towards the defenders. So defenders are trying to stop them. But we can also change the game modes as we see fit. So technically, we could create an operation that is 7 days long with only domination or front lines on it or something like that if we wanted to. And that could be something that we want to explore as we continue the live service for the game.
And I also know that we will add new game modes and they will be featured in ground operations from the get-go. You'll probably only play specific game modes in here. And in the base package, there are some unique ones.
Yeah, there are 3 game modes, or 2 game modes and 1 game mode variation that only show up in ground operations. So first of all, you have Airborne, which I presume everybody has, or like the people who played.
Yeah, that was part of the beta and alpha.
Yeah. So we have Airborne, which is only existing ground operations. And then we have Final Stand, which is actually, like, it's a lot of fun. We had a really intense Final Stand playtest the other day.
Yeah, I lost.
Yeah, I had one where I was actually the last player to survive, and I was on the top floor of a house, and I just put down a bunch of TNT on the staircase leading up, and my entire team is spectating me, and I just like sit there and wait for the first guy to go up, and then I just wait a couple of seconds, and the entire house just explodes, and I die immediately, and everyone is just kind of writing, haha, why didn't you, laughing at me and with me, I presume, but it actually is a really cool experience. But there's those two, and then there's the 64-player version of Frontlines, and that only exists in ground operations.
Yeah, and we will obviously experiment with more of this kind of stuff through the tides of war. And if something plays really well or plays less well, we will also look at changing this up as we go.
Yeah, and I think you said something before that I just want to touch on really quickly. As opposed to BF1, where a lot of the maps were initially designed for Breakthrough, we've really tried to look more of making an experience that and then seeing what fits the best for that, and being more creative and allowing kind of for more freedom.
Yeah.
And I think that really shows. Like the maps are way more different, and they're less like longer and narrow. I don't want to use the word linear, but
yeah, no, but
like that.
We essentially said early on that we don't need every map to support every mode, and that helps in this regard, right?
Yeah.
It makes sure that, okay, this could be linear. This is more linear map, and that's fine. Let's play to its strengths. Right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have kind of been asking for us to be more flexible about that, and I'm really happy we're doing it.
Cool. Let's go on. Let's move on to Twisted Steel. That's your map. Let's go into details. How did this map come about?
It basically started with a similar pitch to what you saw before about Rotterdam, but this one was centered around two things, basically. Flooded areas and the bridge.
Yeah.
That was the keywords in the beginning. And we have iterated so much on this map. We've gone in a lot of different directions. We've tried stuff. Like, it turns out that if you have a really big object in the center of your map that you can see everything from, you kind of need some stuff to hide players below it, or else it will kind of turn into a sniper fest.
Yeah.
So we realized that after the first playtest.
That usually tends to be the first feedback loop from any playtest of a new map, because there's no cover or anything. Like, it's really good for snipers. Yeah.
I mean, we haven't had to, obviously it takes time to build all these things, but starting from that point, we really were intent on trying to make that work, and I think we found a way by kind of making Twisted Steel kind of the most vegetation-heavy map. I think maybe the most vegetation-heavy map we've ever built.
I think it is the most.
Certainly, it's the greenest thing I've ever seen in a Battlefield title. That's for sure. And you can destroy all of it too, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So it kind of goes from being this super lush, almost dense feeling space, even though it's kind of long between different bigger patches of terrains. It goes from being super kind of close quarters and you're running down a ditch, like an irrigation ditch next to a field, being like completely blocked with vegetation on both sides. And then over time, it just changes to be this more open, like scarred landscape. And that's that being player-driven, with like V1 rockets and tanks busting through the trees and all this stuff. Yeah. It makes for a really interesting transition that happens when you're playing the map, especially on a mode like Frontlines, where the constant like focus of people's actions or like player action is being shifted back and forth. It's kind of almost like a kid with a magnifying glass going over the map and just drawing a line back and forth of destruction. But it's really cool seeing that.
Speaking of destruction, one thing I like about it, we have a couple of parameters on our maps, apart from the ones we were looking at before, and one of them is how dynamic the map is, and that's the whole dynamic world, stuff you can interact with, stuff you can destroy, stuff you can build through fortifications, all these things. And this map, even though it's rural in its setting and it's kind of green and lush, like you said, it's pretty amazing how much you can change it with destruction and with building fortifications. That surprised me quite a lot, because I was expecting the most dynamic map. When I think of it, I'm thinking of an urban map where obviously you tear down houses and can open all the doors and all these things. But this one, I think on paper, is the one that you can alter it mostly. So a super long round with a lot of V1s and a lot of explosives and a lot of vehicles will pretty much alter the map entirely towards after say half an hour has gone on this map. So I find out quite impressive.
Yeah, it kind of goes from like a really cozy countryside pictures to being somewhere where you basically couldn't live for 40 years after it happened. So.
And speaking of that, do you have any other inspiration for this map? I heard there was some.
Yeah,
specific.
I mean, the hardest thing for us to build in this map was the airborne area. And me and my two artists that I worked on this, or my three artists actually, Daniel Ax, Robert Berg, and Daniel Carmon, we kind of had a lot of problems with that. So we started over a couple of times, and we came to this crossroads where we had to decide, how is it actually going to be? How are we going to build this? And so we pulled out together all the things that we liked and like that was inspiring us to build it, and we settled on one particular slice of something that I think a lot of people have a lot of strong relations to. And I think that kind of shows. I hope it shows. Please write to me on Twitter if you think it shows.
I'm pretty sure you'll figure out what it is.
Yeah. But so that was an interesting thing, and it actually turned out really well.
Yeah, it changed the gameplay of Airborne, the mode as well, quite a lot when you implemented that.
Yeah, when we started out that though, like when we were looking at rebuilding the entire area entirely, I felt like that was going to be, like, it's not going to get better than this, or like that, because it was a really problematic mode to build in this map. But it turned out really well, and I'm really happy with it now, so I'm super glad we did it.
Yeah, cool. And that's Twisted Steel.
That's Twisted Steel.
Let's move on to the next part. What do you think we are missing now? What's left on this palette?
Yeah, well, obviously we won't hit all the targets, but I think right now we looked at the map, and especially looking at Twisted Steel, and the fact that there's like 4 tanks per side plus 3 planes per side, and we kind of decided that it's a lot, but it's not enough. I think so we did something that has what, 7 or like
7 and beyond.
7 and beyond.
Yeah, currently
So
7.
that is definitely something that we want to explore. First thing that we want to explore, because we know from the past how successful certain experiences were, like super heavy vehicle focus. So that's probably the first one that was going to be next in line, so to speak.
We announced it yesterday, actually.
Yeah,
So it's called Panzer Storm.
Panzer Storm next in line.
Lots
super
and
heavy.
lots of tanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the cool thing here is that looking back at previous titles like Armored Kill or all of those kind of expansions where we have that sort of similar theme, the difference now is we have terrain destruction and terrain craters, which actually creates cover.
And it's upward craters.
Which is amazing because that changes the whole gameplay, and of course fortification, which changes it up even more.
So it's way more dynamic things. Now you can even build stationaries. You can tow certain vehicles to the front. And the other opposite of the spectrum is, of course, the super tiny, super intense infantry battles. That's also something that we'll want to explore. I mean, in the past we have great success, and we know how successful Operation Locker or Metro or Fort de Vaux are. So that's also something that we will explore. We do have we do have the Devastation, which is a super solid infantry map at this point, but we will most likely want to expand that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see maps that we do more like indoors destruction. And
exactly.
Kind of stuff again.
Yeah.
That
if we
really
were
cool.
to scale this down and to create something now with all the fortification stuff, everything that we have available, and the micro destruction and the larger pieces and all these things.
And bullet penetration.
And bullet penetration, that's also something that we added for this title. And it's on a systemic level. It was a very map specific on Rotterdam. It worked on certain objects, not the others, but now it works as we intended it, and it works on fortifications. You can rebuild stuff for the first time, so the destruction doesn't just go one way. You can actually bring it back through fortifications and repairing stuff. So that's also something new.
Yeah, and I think that bullet penetration and how it like gives the scout class, not scout class, but support class, something that's more like their own edge. Yeah. With being able to hit.
I think that's David's favorite thing to do in the playtest now, to spam the MG42.
It's a great experience. Like the MMG is the best thing ever. Letting slice bread. If you have a proper squad that supports you, it's amazing. And you get a lot of kills, and you just sit there screaming.
Or you help
good
a lot.
Happiness.
It's nice, but I'm still at the Church of Angel with just dynamite all the way, baby.
You have to get past my initial fire line.
I'm probably not gonna get there, but like if I get there,
you're gonna try. Well, thank you guys for coming. It's
Thanks
been fun talking about maps and modes.
Yeah.
And see you guys next time.